for attending. We're well through our autumn program of webinars, and I see a number of familiar faces joining today. So again, thank you for popping in. And again, anyone who is new today, just to formally introduce myself, I'm Sam Pawson. I'm the partner in charge of employer services at Chadwick Lawrence. Always a pleasure today. It's a joint event, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Robbie Rouse from Evalu-8. Robbie's just popped his
hey everyone.
So yeah, morning Robbie. So it's a joint event. Throughout the morning, I'll tell you a bit more about who Evalu-8 are, and obviously Robbie will do that himself. Briefly, Evalu-8 are our technological partners in the employment team at Chadwick Lawrence. So they partner with us for our outsourced HR and HR software that we put out to businesses. So Robbie is going to join me today with the presentation and go through the technological and practical side of what we're talking about with part-time workers. So plan for today is hopefully I will talk to you half an hour, 40 minutes or so on the law. We'll go through some issues with part-time workers' rights, some things we're seeing in practice. We're going to go on to holiday entitlement to finish, which I know is the bane of a lot of people's day, in especially HR professionals, if we are calculating part-time holiday entitlement. So we'll go through that, and then Robbie again is going to show you the Evalu-8 system and ways that we can obviously deal with these issues, a lot of shortcuts and solutions that will obviously hopefully make your lives a lot easier. So part-time workers' rights, in terms of a bit setting the scene for today. As I say, we're midway through our webinar program, and the intention from kind of September onwards was to try and avoid the dreaded COVID word, and obviously everything that's come out of that after presenting on COVID and furlough and job retention for 18 months. We've tried to move it on and move back to what we probably call more traditional HR and employment law topics. But I think without going back on that promise, part-time workers' rights is something that is absolutely in vogue at the moment, and at the forefront of a lot of what we're doing. And I think that's only going to come, will only increase over the next months and years. What we're finding in practice, and I should have apologized at the start, introduced my colleague Kira Scanlon, who's joining us on the call today. What Kira and I are seeing in practice is a lot of this, and really what will be the start of this. Again, if we were in a room together, I'd kind of share experiences around the room, but I'll imagine a lot of you have been dealing with this. These issues recently, and probably the start of these issues, because what I'm seeing in practice is in dealing with regularly our flexible working requests, new starters coming into part-time roles. So people have, through COVID and their experiences, often reevaluated their lives, where they are, that work-life balance. And we're seeing a vast ways of people moving to part-time work. So whilst I would imagine maybe this kind of autumn and into winter, what you'll probably be dealing with a lot is people moving on to part-time work, either through flexible working requests or people coming into your organizations. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today will be the next phase after that. So that's where you have people established as part-time employees, obviously knowing their rights. What are their rights when they, if they receive a detriment in some way or think they have received unfavorable treatment? What are their rights? What are their options? Again, and then the practical side, as I say, how do we calculate a holiday? Are we doing it correctly? So these issues are going to become more and more common. And the aim, therefore, of today is to try and kind of educate as to firstly, what individuals' rights are, and then how do we protect ourselves as organisations against potential claims. So what are the claims, but then equally, what are the defences and what are the potential remedies. So that's where we'll start in terms of today. So I will just try and share my screen and put the slides for today. So hopefully everyone can see those. What I would have, in terms of today, I should have mentioned at the start, for those again, and those who've joined us before will be aware, what we normally suggest in these events is to adopt the chat box function. So hopefully by now everyone is familiar with Zoom, but there is a chat box function. So any questions that you've got throughout the presentation, pop them down in the chat box. What we'll try and do is one of two things. We'll either deal with them hopefully at the end if we've got 10 minutes. If we can't get to them, what we'll do is, obviously, and we've got all your contact details and emails, so we will respond in writing to any obviously specific queries that we've got. So, starting point really of today is, well, what is a part-time worker? What are we talking about? Who are we dealing with today? And again, to read out the definition really of a part-time worker, which comes from the part-time worker regulations, where ultimately these set of rules and procedures are set out. So a part-time worker, I will read obviously on your screen, is a person who is paid wholly or in part by reference to the time that they work, and who's not identifiable as a full-time worker. So what does that mean? So again, from the regulations, I'll read you in contrast what's a full-time worker. So what a full-time worker in contrast is a person who is paid wholly or in part by reference to the time they work, and is identifiable as a full-time worker having regard to the employer's customer and practice. So again, incredibly similar. So not hugely helpful from the regulations, but I think what you can take from that in essence the difference between a full-time and a part-time worker is a part-time worker is someone who works essentially fewer hours than the full-time worker. And I think hours is important there, because what we also have seen through COVID and otherwise is flexibility introduced into a lot of workforces, and hybrid worker policies and flexible working policies becoming in force. Someone who is working full-time hours but not over a full-time pattern, for me, would still obviously be a full-time worker. So those working condensed hours or different hours, they would still be a full-time worker, because again, essentially their pay is in reference to the time they work. So there is a distinction there, with flexibility of hours rather than pay, and these in reference to the hours that they work. So can be confusing, can not be quite clear, because I think I would know in our practice and otherwise there are a number of people who don't work 5 days a week but are full-time employees. So that really is a distinction. A worker, again, you will note, and again, I'm not going to present today on a employment status seminar talking obviously employees, workers, contractors, but we are defining here as a worker, which in the regulations is defined as someone who works under a contract of employment or other contract for personal fulfillment of work or service. So it is that wider definition that can be caught here, rather than just employees. So if we have defined what a worker is, we now need to just determine ultimately what is their rights and what are their protections. So again, we find the answer to that in the Part-Time Workers Regulations, 2009. Again, I will kind of read from the legislation itself, but what that protects part-time workers from are to be protected from being treated less favourably than an equivalent full-time worker. What that will mean in practice, they should therefore get the same treatment for pay rates, pension, opportunity, and benefits. So I'll talk in the next few slides about in practice what those things are, and in practice going through the pay, the benefits on each case. But what the part-time workers regulations do is protection from less favourable treatment. So that is the key, this idea of less favourable treatment, which we'll go through in more details. We'll get into defences in a second, but again, the legislation stipulates that the regulations allow part-time workers to challenge less favourable treatment on the grounds of their part-time status if it cannot be objectively justified. So we're going to talk again about objective justification in a moment. When we are showing less favourable treatment, what the part-time work regulations require is that you identify a comparator. So again, if this was a discrimination seminar, and we were talking about direct discrimination, we talk about comparators, so that the idea of that for people who are more familiar with it in a discrimination setting is similar. The slight difference is that the part-time workers regulations actually require you to identify a real comparator, not a hypothetical one. So there has to be a real comparator in that organization. So if I, as a part-time worker, is saying I've been treated less favorably than X, we need to be showing who X is, and that obviously person needs to be a full-time worker. So what the regulations don't allow is, well, hypothetically someone in my position who would be a full-time worker. This needs to be an actual comparator, and that comparator must be an appropriate comparator who is, as I say, is a full-time worker. They must work for the same company and under the same type of contract, and must be engaged in a similar, although obviously an identical role. So the challenge often in these cases is that comparator that we need to find, and that the comparator, as I say, is in that role. When you have smaller organizations, obviously that isn't always easy to do. And again, we'll touch on later how often in practice it is rare for Kira and I in practice to see claims solely under the part-time workers regulations. You will often always generally see these in combination with another claim, often indirect discrimination, obviously on the grounds of sex generally, but not always. So you'll find that comparator issue is often got round with in other ways, but purely under the part-time workers regulations, there has to be an actual comparator. Important, again, the slides kind of comment that under the regulations, there is no legal right to switch to part-time working. So these regulations don't provide a right to part-time working. They deal with the treatment of part-time workers. And again, when we were talking at the start about the kind of background to that, it's important to note that we still, again, as the law standard at this day, there is no right to either work part-time, or there is no right to work flexibly. There is a right to make a flexible working request, and a number of obviously part-time workers come through that route. Often in practice, part-time workers are now done by the challenges in recruitment, that I know a number of businesses are going through at the moment, and it's necessity. You're not finding people who are prepared to work full time, so we're getting part-time workers, through the market and through the competition within the market. But important to stress outside of the compliance with regulations, there is no right to work part-time. So if those are obviously the rights, we touched on ultimately the justification defense. So this is the defense to the claim. So what we need to show, obviously, if there is an individual who can show less favorable treatment, that the less favorable treatment is justifiable if the treatment aims achieve a legitimate objective. So that, again, as an organization facing these claims, facing these challenges, that even if there is less favorable treatment, if we can justify that as justifiable, if we achieve that legitimate objective, and we'll go through that in detail. But just to give you an example, an employer would be able to justify not promoting a part-time worker if they have concerns about their performance, for example, because that has nothing to do with the fact that they work part-time. So we're getting into reasons and obviously why there is less favorable treatment. They've not been promoted, but that's justifiable because we have a legitimate aim here, obviously, of dealing with performance. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail, and obviously we'll touch on now what we're talking about in terms of equal treatment. So a non-exhaustive list here, but these are the ones that we are seeing in practice, being the key areas for part-time workers. So a lot of it will be common sense, but this is where you will need to really show equal treatment for part-time workers, and mainly obviously on a pro rata basis, which again we'll touch on. But the key ones, obviously, part-time workers should receive the same hourly rate as a comparable full-time worker. So you don't want to be having, historically, organizations have had a part-time rate and a full-time rate. No, it needs to be equal. It needs to be equal to that full-time worker is working. Overtime, again, part-time workers should receive the same hourly rate as an overtime pay as a comparable full-time worker. Once they've worked more hours than a normal full-time hours. So again, there needs to be a pro-rating of hours, but once that has been done, their rate should be the same. For promotion, again, this is where often in practice organizations can get themselves in trouble for individuals being overlooked for promotion for opportunities because they are part-time. So again, prime practice, probably the one we're dealing with the most. The key is that a previous or current part-time status shouldn't be a barrier for promotion, even if that job is full-time. That's not to say you have to make the job that is promoted a part-time job. The key is that the person's status shouldn't be a barrier. So they should be given the opportunity to apply, even if it is a full-time role. So we shouldn't be obviously putting individuals to a detriment because they at that time or historically have received a part-time work on a part-time basis. Again, employers shouldn't discriminate or between full and part-time staff in relation to pension schemes. Again, unless we can differentiate on objective grounds. So again, qualification for pension schemes needs to be in account of part-time hours. Again, training, real common one. We shouldn't obviously provide barriers for training. For example, just because the training isn't on the day that someone is working part-time, we need to consider that. We need to consider, well, can we do it another day? or why, if it can't be, why is it, you need to be able to objectively justify it has to be on that day. So again, that justification is key. Is that because of, you know, other availability, the availability of people presenting, the cost of that? There needs to be this justification, not that just we fancy doing it on a Friday and Dawn just doesn't happen to work on a Friday. So again, we need to be considering that. Redundancy selection, again, we shouldn't deal with that when we are dealing with criteria. So if we're going through an objective criteria for a redundancy, the individual's part-time status needs to be taken into account. So if you're doing criteria that has any relation to, obviously, if it's in a sales environment or a billing environment, that obviously that part-time workers will bill less, they'll sell less, but it needs to be prorated down. So we are looking at people at the same level of time worked. So all of those, really anything with criteria, most of that needs to be taken into account of the hours that the individuals are working. Benefits, again, we need to ensure that these hopefully are applied pro rata. Obviously benefits, health insurance, company cars, pensions, we've talked about. Anything that we should try and pro rata, again, unless it can't be objectively justified. So we need to look at that and the cost of that and how it can be done. So to finish on, before I move on to holidays, because I'm slightly conscious of the time, it is just to talk about, obviously, what can potentially go wrong. So what we're obviously looking to achieve is that we won't be facing claims in these regards, but if you do, just to talk you through the kind of remedy requirements. So under the part-time workers regulations, employees who believe that they are being unfavorably treated have a right to request a written statement from their employer to confirm why they are not being unfavorably treated. So if they believe they're, you know, any of these things, their hourly rate it isn't equal, they've been overlooked for a promotion, the part-time worker have a right to request that statement, where obviously the employer will then have to justify it. So I have to justify there isn't unequal treatment, or as we talked about, it can be, or why it can be objectively justified. So unlike many areas of law, most part-time workers claims under the part-time workers regulations are done by people still in employment. So whilst when we touch on discrimination, that's often done by people who have left or have claimed constructive dismissal, this can be done by people who are still in employment. So there is that step, really a pre-litigation step of this written statement that you sometime receive. Ultimately, if that's not the case and the written statement doesn't satisfy the individual, they still have then a right to claim under the part-time workers regulations for that less favourable treatment. What the outcome of that can be is either mainly two things. So you can get an order from the tribunal to recompense that, and to make an order to ultimately, if it's a pay issue, they can rectify that and they can make an order that is done. Apart from those cases, obviously the claim is in compensation for the loss suffered. So can be done, as I say, often done whilst still in employment. In practice, as I started with, what you will generally see is these claims being brought in combination with a number of other claims. Historically, before the part-time workers regulations came into force, these claims were often brought as indirect sex discrimination claims. Again, not suggesting at all that obviously part-time workers, these claims only happen to generally female members of staff. Obviously, the overriding numbers of staff who work part-time are female, so therefore the claims generally are coming from that in volume, but they are often brought, as I say, in conjunction with other claims. So that again is what we're trying to avoid, but it's important that you're aware of that. So moving on, just for the final bit of my talk, is the issue that we probably get the most calls about and the most inquiries with part-time workers. Kira will attest. It's something that we'll see at least one or two a week, and when I look at these, the provisions, when you read them, are simple. It's the practice that is the difficulty, and Robbie is going to show you some fantastic technological solutions to these, but I'll talk you through the theory to start with. So again, appreciate that the vast majority of people here will obviously be aware of this, but we'll start with what obviously is an annual holiday entitlement. So that obviously for full-time workers is this idea of 5.6 weeks holiday. Again, that's 28 days normally in normal speak. So that is split up between two types of holiday in this country. There's 4 weeks, 20 days, which is your statutory holiday, and then the 1.6 weeks, the 8 days of bank holidays. So that is the statutory minimum. Obviously, a number of organisations will then have contractual holidays on top of that. So either through length of service, through seniority, that there will be an agreement, obviously, on top of that 28 days, that those individuals obviously get a contractual entitlement over and above. Obviously, the key with part-time workers is that obviously there needs to be equal treatment, not just for statutory holidays, but for contractual holidays as well. So that's your starting position. So ultimately, holidays for part-time workers should be reduced on a pro-rata basis. So we'll talk again about pro-rata principles coming up, and Robbie again will show you how that's done in practice. Often a question we'll get, and the answer comes from a German case. I'll do my best, try and remember my best GCSE German pronunciation, but it's from the Zentralbetriebsrat der Landes Krankenhausen Tirols versus Land Tyrol case, so a European case that we get the answer. But the question is obviously what happens to a worker who reduces their holidays part way through the year. The answer is obviously that an employee who moves from full-time to part-time work should not suffer a reduction in their annual leave, which has been accrued but they've been unable to take. What that means in practice, that a calculation must take place to ascertain the holiday entitlement accrued up to the date that the individual reduced their hours and to the date of the holiday year. So just to give you a kind of worked example of that. So employee works full time, reducing their work pattern from four days to 4 days per week. So from 5 to 4 on the 1st of July. Holiday year runs from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. Their usual holiday entitlement full-time hours is 28 days. So the calculation there is that we work it out in days. So we have 181 days from the 1st of January to the 30th of June. And we times that by 28 days, obviously being the full-time equivalent. That's 13.88 days. We then work. So that's the full-time equivalent up to the 1st of June. So we've got 13.88. We then have another 184 days from the 1st of July to the 31st of December. We divide that by obviously the year, 365 days, and times that by 28, and then times that by 0.8, because that's what they've now moved to, which is obviously a part-time work going from 5 to 4 days. So that's what the 0.8 gets. That gives you 1129 days. Total annual leave, therefore, would be 25.17 days, but we'll round that up to half a day to 25.5. Given that calculation, appreciate not on the slide. So what we'll do at the end, obviously, all these calculations will include in the slide pack, which we can send over to you. So that obviously deals with a reduction post through the year, generally calculating holidays. So we're again giving you an example on screen with Jane, who is employed as a receptionist for the company XYZ Limited, to work 3 days a week, namely Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Full-time employees at XYZ Limited receive a holiday entitlement of 20 days plus the 8 statutory bank holidays, giving a full-time entitlement of 28 days. So again, if I was doing this seminar in person, what we do is we get a show of hands, and we'd ask what Jane's holiday entitlement would be. Is it a 16.8 days rounded to 17, or is it 12 days plus her bank holidays? And bank holidays often in these scenarios is where all the problems arise for individuals calculating part-time holiday entitlement. So bank holidays, and the answer to the question really is both those answers can be correct, and this is where the frustration lies, because the part-time workers regulations don't provide a definitive position on this, and there is case law again which doesn't provide a definitive position. So either of those that we can work, and I'll work through those examples of how we can achieve that, but both those examples can work. We can either pro-rata the whole amount, or we can work through the bank holidays. The key is whichever one you decide to do, that you need to take a consistent approach for all your employees. So we're not cherry picking some and not the others, depending on what their pattern is and what working pattern is. As most people appreciate, the challenge comes with Monday working, essentially, when the vast majority of the bank holidays occur. So the consideration again for the organisations to create that consistent approach is what working days are, when the company's working days are. Does the company work bank holidays, for example? A number of organisations do, and again how the holidays are monitored. So going back to Jane's example, perhaps I find that the most simpler way is to pro-rata the whole thing. So to start with the 28 days and give her a pro-rated entitlement to the whole amount. Obviously, that might benefit her depending on her working days, but it's the simplest way of doing it. If we then exclude bank holidays from the calculation, we'll say for the example we gave with Jane, she worked Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Jane's working days would therefore would only fall on 2 bank holidays, judging by if we're adopting 20 and 21 bank holidays. So there would be the New Year's Day and the Good Friday, which would be her working days. So what you therefore can do is to look at the days there that they work and only give the bank holidays they would have worked as holidays. So that's where you're starting with the 12 days, and then looking through that to see what they would work, and obviously only giving them those bank holiday days. So they really are the two main methods of doing it. What I wanted to achieve today is to obviously take that fairly convoluted example and pass on to Robbie as a way that we're actually going to do this in practice. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen. I will pass over to Robbie. He'll give you a little introduction as obviously to who he is, and then we'll take you through some actual practical examples of part-time workers in organisations, how you're dealing with their hours, their rotas, and we'll run through some holiday calculations with that. So I'll pass over to Robbie, and I'll come back at the end, obviously, to deal with any questions and obviously to sum up the day.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. Sam, can you see my mouse moving around on there?
We can. I just muted myself. Yes, yep, I can see. We're all good to go.
Great stuff. Thank you. So I'm from a company called Evalu-8. We work in partnership with Chadwick Lawrence, and we provide their clients with HR software. Well, it's actually a bit more than HR software. It's human resources, health and safety, time and attendance, and a bunch of other things mixed in. So what I'm going to do today is focus on the working patterns and some of the tools that are at your disposal within the software that should make what Sam has just explained a lot easier in practice. When you log into the software, you're presented with a dashboard, and it has on there these boxes that we refer to as widgets. And these give you useful information that you might want at your fingertips, or the ability to do things within the system that you might want to do frequently, like book leave if you're a regular employee, or go to your favorite reports and so on. So this is customizable. The widgets that are available to you will be in this drop down here, and the employee can choose the widgets that they want from the ones that they're allowed to see, and make those visible on their dashboard, and then they can move them around to configure the screen how they want it to appear. From there, we've got some menus which take you to parts of the system that you might use frequently. So where I'm going to start is by just showing you some working patterns. So if we go to admin and settings, within there, this is all part of the initial setup of the system. But you can go down to the working patterns area, and these are all of the working patterns that I've built for my company, which we will then assign to employees. So it's very simple. You click on the green button to add a working pattern, and you give it a name. So this could be the name of the working pattern itself. So for example, Monday to Thursday, 8 till 2, or it could be the name of an employee, whatever you find easier to locate it later on. And then you simply tick the days that the employee with this working pattern will work, start time, finish time, and break time, and then you save that, and that's now available. If I then go to my team, it brings up my list of employees. So if I look at Alia here, click on her record and go to her working details page, I've got this drop down with all of my working patterns that we just looked at available to me. I've selected a part-time working pattern here for Alia. The other options on here, if you have a member of staff that doesn't have a set working pattern, you can use this section over here, which enables you to determine things like leave entitlement based upon clocking in and out activity, if you wanted to use that functionality, or the rota, if you wanted to use that functionality. In the employment details tab is where you'd set individual rules for an employee, where you can overwrite the company settings. So in here, I've got the annual leave entitlement based on a full-time equivalent. The system will then calculate that person's holiday entitlement based on a few things. So first of all, the date that they started. So if they're a new starter, it will prorata because of that. Whether there's a leave date in their calendar in this setting here. So If it's an employee that's serving their notice, you'd put the leave date in there, and again, it will prorata the annual entitlement down for you. You can set company-wide rules, which can all be overwritten on an individual basis. So for example, what I've got in this demonstration company here is the bank holidays we are closed as an organization. So for every employee, I've got the base here of 20 days plus bank holidays because we're closed. But this system is just a setting on here that allows you to either include or exclude bank holidays. The other thing in here is by default, the leave entitlement is shown in days, but that can be changed to show in hours if that's how you calculate your entitlement. We can also set up rules, things like extra days earned based on length of service, and that will automatically apply leave. So ultimately, there's no manual calculation around leave entitlement, whether it's a full-time employee or a part-time employee. If somebody changes their working pattern mid-year, we have the ability to make an adjustment, and then there's a log kept of that change. But if we go to their leave tab, so this system is a cloud-based software system. All employees can have their own login. There's an app that accompanies it, and on that app, employees can view their leave summary, so how many days or hours they're entitled to. They can see what they've booked already, and then they can request leave through that, and it will then go through the approval process to the people who can authorize that leave or reject that leave. But ultimately, this is the main leave page within the portal itself. At the top, you've got a summary here. So this breaks it down to less than half a day if you want it to, and gives you an overall how many days are remaining. Down here, we've got everything that's been booked so far. So it's already been approved. Various leave types. So we have in our company tools area, we have a couple of shared calendars. So this one is an annual planner. So you can filter by role, department, site, etc. in here. But this pretty much tells you the movements of the person or people, and you can control who can see what on here. There's another one that is more of a weekly or monthly view, where you can flick from month to month, and you can synchronize this with Outlook and other email programs. But the important thing is here, they all use the same key at the top, and behind each of these leave types is a set of rules, such as should this leave type be paid or unpaid? Should it come off holiday entitlement or not? Can the employee book it off themselves or not, and so on and so forth. So all of that's done initially in the setup. So back to our employee. If this person wants to book leave, they just simply click on the button. Now, I'm logged in as an administrator, so all leave types will be available to me. But if this was Alia here logging in herself, she would only have the ones that are available to her. So holiday and a couple of others. Like I say, this is all customizable. So if you use different terminology such as annual leave instead of holiday, then that's fine, you would use that. You can then choose whether it's a full day or a half day. It will ask you for AM or PM or a custom period. So particularly if you're using hours, then you can just book a couple of hours off. If that employee has accrued time off in leave, if you're using time off in lieu, if you're using that feature, and they have time off in lieu in the bank, if you tick that box, it will use that as a priority over any holiday entitlement. It will tell you once you've selected the first day of leave and the last day of leave over what period, if that employee works during this period, that they're requesting off. I select full day. So here we can see this person's part-time. They've got a period of 5 days that they're booking off, but actually only 3 of them are working days. So it's 3 that will be deducted from their entitlement. I'll just untick that. If I save that, then the manager will be set, or the approver or approvers will be sent an email to tell them that Alia here has requested some annual leave, and it will prompt them to go to the authorization area and review that. And that is located on this menu. And when they do that, they can see who else is already off at the same time, how much time this person would have remaining if they were to accept the leave, and then they can accept it or reject it. But there are rules that you can set for things like a limit on how many people can be off simultaneously from one department or site or role or team. There are other rules where you can blank days that people can't book out, so it wouldn't even get this far. You can also use the bulk leave tool. So if you did want to include bank holidays in entitlement for part-time workers, then you can use the bulk annual leave tool to book all of those out, maybe at the start of the year, for example. So all of that's done for them, and it shows on the employee's individual planner. If we go back to the employee and their leave tab, their individual planner here will show you their movements for the entire year. And then beyond that, we've got some useful reports around leave. So the leave summary report will show how many days or hours somebody has taken, how many they've got remaining left to take, how many have been booked and not yet taken, and so on. So this is a useful tool if you have a policy where employees have to use their leave by the end of your leave year. It gives the managers an idea of how many people are likely to be looking at booking leave towards the end of that leave process period, rather. And the leave report is another tool where you can just put a filter in here and you can review various leave that's been taken. So this is everything in the last year. I can analyze here what type of leave is being taken, and I can drill down if I wanted to on how much maternity leave's been taken, or I can look at a particular employee from these reports here. So yeah, I think the main message really from me regarding this seminar is the ability for the system to calculate those calculations that you may be doing manually right now. So you can choose to include bank holidays or exclude according to your own company policy. And if somebody has a 3-day working pattern, 4-day working pattern, the system will take care of those calculations automatically for you. Sam, back to you.
Yeah, perfect. And thanks, Robbie, for that. Really helpful. And I think obviously explained in really good practical terms what I was talking about and the options there that are available to you. I think obviously what Robbie says, and this applies both with if you're using Evalu-8 tools or not and doing this manual. The key is, just as Robbie has set his rules, that you set your rules, even if you're doing a manual calculation. So the elements of working through that and having that consistent approach is the key in these type of matters, and where organizations get themselves into trouble. So just for me to finish off, we did have a question in the chat from Penelope, so thank you for that, Penelope, who's asked to clarify overtime rate if more than standard rate wouldn't be applied to part-time workers overtime until they've exceeded the hours of full-time employee. Yeah, that's absolutely right. There needs to be, once they've exceeded, for the enhanced rate to apply. So yes, it's equal treatment there. So it's yeah, absolutely that's the right understanding of that. So yeah, just for me really to finish on a few notes. Obviously, to thank everyone for attending. A special big thanks to Robbie for showing that solution. As I started, we were midway through our seminar events season. I think everyone on today, I think, should be on our Monday morning dispatch mailing list, where obviously we confirm the events every Monday. Anyone who's not, please drop Kira or myself an email, and we'll pop them on. All the events are on the website, so they will obviously, if you want to sign up for any of the next events, website is the best place to look. We have recorded this session, so that the recording for any colleagues who've missed that, or anyone you want to send out on to will be available. We'll send a link out. It goes on our YouTube page, but I'll send links out in the Monday morning dispatch. I can, as I said to you, I can make the slides available to anyone who needs them. That'll also have the worked examples that we've gone through on the slides that we can share. The current hope is that I'm currently with Kira putting together our 2022 seminar plan. Tentatively, we are hoping to get back to doing some of these events in person. I know a number of you have been on the in-person events, so we're going to try and get back. We probably will do a hybrid type model where we'll continue to do some webinars, but then we'll again do some in person as well. Your feedback and comments is always really important on that. So again, if you'd like to see some in-person events, let us know. Equally, topics, we always want to present on things that are interesting and are obviously applicable to people at the moment. So any suggestions, any topics that you'd like us to present on, please drop us an email, and we'll put those thoughts into the program for next year. So that's it for me. Finished 5 minutes early, which is fantastic for me, who has a 12 o'clock meeting. So again, thank you all for coming. Big thanks to Robbie. Thanks for my part for Kira for helping me with today's event and putting together the slides. Lovely to see you all, and we'll hopefully catch up soon, either in person in 2022 or obviously on another webinar before that. So thank you, and hope you all have a good day.